And I got involved mainly because I also work on biomass for biofuels. When I first came in 2003, that was part of my job description, was to work on biofuels as well. So I got incorporated into a study a few years ago, actually in 2009, and that got me involved in this. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about that. In that study, we from 2009 to 2014, we used a number of different winter cover crops. We looked at those. We wanted to see what performed best as legumes in a cover in a biomass sorghum cotton rotation. So we're using, for the summer crops, we were having biomass, sorghum, and then cotton. We had this at 2 locations. There were about I would say about a couple hundred yards apart, but they had very different history. One was very heavily used in a rotation system. The other one was pretty basically fallow. The soil type was very similar, however. Within each cover crop, we treat the treatment, we either harvested or rolled. And so part of this, we wanted to see what was going to be the effect of removing the biomass, so that now we have just the root biomass versus rolled, which would have both the above ground and below ground biomass, and see how that affected things. The original PI of this was Ted Webster. He's a weed scientist, and so he had some underlying aspects on the weed side of that as well. Unfortunately, he passed away about 5 years ago, and so we haven't even published this. I'm currently working on this paper right now, at least the first paper. Did a lot of work with the soils as well. There we go. Okay, so the different rationale, I'll skip over this pretty quickly, but basically looking at these different winter cover legumes to see how and also the cool season rye to see whether or not there would be what the differences would be, both above ground and below ground. Let's see, I think I skipped over a slide here. Let me see if I can get it back to, okay. These are the winter legumes we tried: crimson clover, faba bean, cassava vetch. We had rye, Austria, as far as the grasses, Austrian winter pea. Also, we had fertilized and unfertilized controls. But the blue lupin, and we had blue lupin, so that was going back to one of our first talks about blue lupin that had been used many, many years ago. This was this was in this trial. So just to look at the biomass, you know, we talked, a lot of the talks were talking about the amount of biomass and how important that is. And this is a cumulative over 5 years, and this is dry matter, kilograms per hectare. And the lupin by far exceeded all the other legumes, as well as the rye, as far as biomass. The Bellflower farm on the left, that is the farm that was heavily used rotationally before we started on this trial. The Sanders farm was one that was fallow. So even in the fallow, the previously fallow field, which is basically grasses and such, you could see that there was a lot of difference. So each of the different colors are the 5 different years of the study. Okay, so then we looked at the sorghum yields over those 5 years, and this rotated either one location or the next across those 2 locations over the 5 years. And this is looking at both locations. So I've got a lot of data here that's going to be in a publication, but I'm trying to summarize as best I can. And we can see that the lupin, again, gave us the best or the highest sorghum yields over the 5 years on average. So this was biomass sorghum. We were removing the sorghum and weighing it. And looking at the rolled versus the covers on this study, there was definitely a higher yield on the rolled plots versus the harvested plots of the from the covers, but it was varied by year. In a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, it didn't vary. It was not significantly different. So the biomass in the roots also has a big effect on this as well. On the cotton yields, we also saw an increase using the lupin for cotton yields. And this was even over the fallow cover crops, but using organic fertilizer or inorganic fertilizer to supplement with the nitrogen for the summer crops. These ended up being showing that the lupin was showing an improvement in yields as well. So let's see, I'm waiting on the next one. Okay, so here are a few pictures. The sorghum on the left was in control. This was 2011. This was after about 3 years of the continuous covers. And then the blue lupin on the right, you can see the height differences. Very, very dramatic. You could actually see the differences in color of the soil. It was actually even darker. This was very sandy soil. And this was in 2012 in this other field, and it's, again, you see the differences in height here. Very dramatic. This was blade sorghum. This was a biomass sorghum that had been commercialized for potential use in a biofuel. All right, so narrow-leaf lupin has been used for many years. It's native to the Mediterranean basin. It can be grown in many of the countries, Australia, South Africa, and Europe. It's currently grown there. It has traditionally had a high alkaloid level, which makes it improper for forage. But with breeding, they have actually reduced that alkaloid level quite extent, and so it can actually be used as a forage. And but it is susceptible to root knot nematodes, as we heard a little bit earlier. It can incorporate quite a bit of nitrogen into the soil. Back in the late 40s and early 50s, there was quite a bit of lupin grown, 56,000 acres in over the southeast. And TIF Blue 78, which is what we used in that study, is actually winter hardy and somewhat disease resistant, and the alkaloid levels are lower. So, and then there's different aspects of the narrow-leaf lupin. This is what it looks like. Pretty much, it's cold tolerant, and it varies among the species. And it can grow, and it does pretty well. We've had, of the 5 years, we grew carinata as well, and we didn't see any winter damage on the lupin where we did with the carinata. Also, in the second study that I'm going to mention here in a minute, we also used white lupin, which is another species, Lupinus alba. And that is sweet. So that does not have the alkaloids that the blue lupin does. It's good for baleage, and it's bred for higher yields at Auburn. And we're now trying to increase it for commercial seed production. There seems to be very little in the commercial seed of white lupin in the United States. So we're trying to get that increased so that it can be released. We're trying to get some interest from seed companies if possible. On our current study, we tried the narrow leaf lupin, blue lupin, and the white lupin with or without cereal rye as a winter cover crop. And in this study, we're rotating peanut and cotton at 3 locations for 4 years. We're in the 2.5-year stage right now. Basically, we've got the second year of the summer crop after 3 years of covers. And we're either harvesting or rolling like the previous study. And then we'll look at the effects of the summer crops and the soil before and after using the cover crops. We have a fallow in there as well to compare with. We plant the covers in appropriate time, usually mid to late October, no later than the beginning of November. And you can see what these look like in February and March. Then in April, at the end of April, we try to harvest it to make sure we have plenty of time to that 2 to 3 week time frame to be able to plant our cotton and our peanuts. We'll either harvest that material and take it off so that we have an effect of the harvest, or we roll it. And after rolling, we'll then spray it with Roundup and get it killed down. And in May, we will plant the peanuts and cotton, usually with a strip till rig. And so then we harvest the normal times, the peanut and cotton, depending on, we use the scrape hull method for the peanuts, and make sure that we have pretty good Boll presence on the cotton before we do the harvest. And you can see this above ground. You can see some of the plots we have. Those are at Shellman. This is at Shellman. It's a heavy clay soil, whereas in Tifton and Fort Valley, it's a loamy, sandy loam soils, TIF soils. And from above, you can see that there are some differences in stand. Some of the ones, the covers, especially in Fort Valley, we noticed that the covers were rolled with rye. There were a lot more skips. And of course, we harvest the summer crops. Unfortunately, we had to hand harvest some area in Fort Valley. They didn't have the equipment to allow us to machine harvest, but the other locations we machine harvested as normal. All right, so, and then of course, then we would replant in November, early November, and you can see that some of the cover crops are popping out within the residual cotton and peanut. So we're just using strip till and on these. So this is from the 2018. This is after the second year of covers. The cover crop in that year, you can see the 3 locations, Tifton, Shellman, and Fort Valley. There was a lot of variation between the different locations. Fort Valley, for example, the rye was the highest yielder in that year, whereas in Tifton, the narrow leaf and narrow leaf plus rye had the higher yields. And then in Shellman, it was a kind of a mixed bag, but they all produced quite a pretty good amount of cover biomass. So if we take the yields, and I'm not going to show the yields that year of 2018 for the summer crops, but instead just go right to the economic evaluation. And this was done by Marshall Lamb, our economist over in the peanut lab in Dawson, and he ran whole farm. And we used basically on this, we just looked at the peanut and cotton yields for that year in both Tifton and Shellman, and he ran the numbers on on input and output. And you can see on the third column on each one, the net return. In Tifton, for example, the rye, all of them except for the narrowleaf rye gave a positive influence on net returns versus fallow, and the rye was actually was the highest, but just barely above the narrowleaf lupin by itself. And then on the peanut yields from that year, you can look and you can see that compared to the fallow, really the narrowleaf lupin and the white lupin, and also the white lupin with rye actually had an increase in net value. In Shellman, the cotton yields are very low because that was a hurricane year. So the yields of the cotton were very low. So all the net returns were negative. But in the peanuts, we were able to dig and pick those at a normal time. And you can see that there was an increase in the white lupin, for example, and also in rye versus the fallow. So they were a mixed bag. This was just for 1 year. We're going to be doing this for each of the next 2 years, 2019, and we haven't evaluated that from this past year. And this next year, 2020, and then also in 2021, we'll be looking at the summer crop and how the yields are on that. But if you were able to take the white lupin, which is sweet, and the rye for forage, then you look at the net return for the full system versus fallow. The rye definitely would be an increase, as well as most of the others. Of course, the narrowleaf and the narrowleaf with rye, we're not taking that off and using that for baleage or for hay or anything, but and so that's why the values are much lower there. But for white lupin and rye, if these crops can be used for baleage or for grazing, then the net return would be better. And so we'll continue this again with next three more years, and we'll get the full results, and hopefully we'll have something more to talk about at the end of 2021. And that's my presentation.
Thank you, Bill. We do have a question from Joel Love that we can take quickly here. He said, Kirk Brock harvested dryland 5,800 pounds of peanuts per acre after no tilling, not strip tilling peanuts into rolled bitter blue lupin. Could the alkaloids in the bitter blue lupin have a positive benefit to the next cash crop?
Good question. I don't know. We don't seem to see a great difference between the white and the blue, but after we finish the full trial over the 4 years of covers, then we'll probably answer that better.